Dawn breaks over an ancient African savanna. The golden light spills across a landscape both familiar and alien. Creatures move in the tall grasses. Some walk on four legs. Others stand upright on two. Among these upright figures are beings that look almost human. Their eyes hold a spark of intelligence as they craft simple tools. They communicate with gestures and vocalizations that hint at language. But these are not our direct ancestors. They are our cousins, parallel experiments in the human form. Beings who walked Earth for hundreds of thousands of years. Species who built cultures, created art, and survived ice ages. And then, one by one, they vanished. This is the story of the greatest extinction we never talk about, the lost humans who didn't make it. When we speak of mass extinctions, we envision dinosaurs obliterated by asteroids or ancient marine creatures disappearing from primordial seas. But the most relevant extinction to our own story remains largely untold. It happened recently, geologically speaking. It happened to beings who looked into the night sky with wonder, who protected their young, who mourned their dead. Beings whose DNA still flows in many of us today. What's most unsettling is that we, Homo sapiens, are the sole survivors of this extinction event. We are the last humans standing in what was once a rich family tree of diverse hominins spread across Earth. The traditional narrative of human evolution depicts a triumphant march of progress, from primitive ape to modern human. A single, direct line ascending toward an inevitable conclusion: us. This comforting story is fundamentally wrong. The truth is far more complex and haunting. Our evolutionary story resembles a shrub more than a tree, with numerous branches growing simultaneously. Branches that withered and died while ours, somehow, continued to flourish. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, Homo naledi. These are just the species we've managed to name. How many others lived and died without leaving traces we've discovered? How many ghosts walk beside us? For over 99% of the time that hominins have existed on Earth, multiple human species shared the planet. The world we know today, where only one kind of human exists, is the anomaly, not the norm. This documentary explores a profound question. What happened to all the others? What forces, natural or otherwise, led to their extinction while we alone survived? And what does their disappearance tell us about ourselves? We'll journey through time to examine the evidence left behind by our lost relatives. Fragments of bone, stone tools, genetic traces, and environmental clues. Each piece telling part of a story that science is still struggling to assemble. We'll explore competing theories that attempt to explain this human extinction event. Climate change, resource competition, disease, cognitive differences, and the controversial possibility that our own ancestors played a direct role in their disappearance. Imagine standing at a crossroads in time, 50,000 years ago. You might encounter several different types of humans, each with their own adaptations, cultures, and futures. Yet somehow, all paths but one would eventually end. The traditional view held that these extinct human species were evolutionary dead ends, failed experiments rendered obsolete by our superior adaptations. This narrative is increasingly challenged by new discoveries that paint a more complex picture. Far from being primitive, many of these lost humans possessed capabilities that rivaled or sometimes exceeded our own. Neanderthals had larger brains. Some species navigated open oceans long before we did. Others thrived in environments where we struggled. What if their extinction wasn't inevitable? What if it was, in some sense, accidental, the result of circumstance rather than inherent deficiency? What if, in a slightly different reality, they survived and we disappeared instead? These questions matter beyond academic curiosity. They challenge our understanding of what it means to be human and our assumptions about our special status on this planet. They remind us that survival is never guaranteed. Throughout history, Homo sapiens have told themselves stories about their uniqueness and superiority. These narratives shaped how we understand our place in the world. The extinction of our closest relatives is a chapter we've largely omitted. This documentary aims to illuminate these shadows in our ancestry, to acknowledge the lost branches of humanity and consider what their absence means. To recognize that, for most of human history, we were not alone. We'll explore ancient landscapes from Europe to Indonesia, from the depths of South African caves to the frozen steppes of Siberia. Places where different human species once lived, loved, created, and eventually disappeared. We'll examine fossil evidence through advanced technologies, DNA analysis, isotope studies, 3D reconstructions that allow us to glimpse lives separated from us by tens of thousands of years, lives that ended in extinction, and we'll confront uncomfortable questions about our own role in their disappearance. Did we outcompete them? Did we absorb them through interbreeding? Or is there evidence for something darker, conflict, displacement, or worse? The story of lost human species isn't just about the distant past. It's about understanding our present and contemplating our future. It forces us to reckon with a profound truth. For the first time in millions of years, only one human species walks Earth. This solitude is unprecedented in our evolutionary history. We navigate our world without competitors or companions of our genus, without alternative perspectives on what it means to be human. What have we lost in this homogeneity? And perhaps most importantly, what can the extinction of our closest relatives teach us about our own vulnerabilities? If they could disappear after hundreds of thousands of years of success, what guarantees do we have of our own permanence? Join us as we unravel one of the greatest mysteries in human history, a mystery about those who were almost us, those who walked parallel paths for millennia before vanishing into evolutionary shadows, the lost humans who didn't make it. Chapter 2. The last one standing. Why should the extinction of other human species matter to us? We've been alone for roughly 40,000 years, the sole representatives of genus Homo. Their disappearance seems like ancient history, irrelevant to our modern concerns. But this perspective misses something profound. Our solitary status as the only human species is both recent and anomalous. For over 2 million years, multiple types of humans coexisted, competed, and occasionally collaborated across Earth's landscapes. Imagine growing up knowing there were other kinds of people, fundamentally like you, but distinctly different. People with their own ways of speaking, thinking, and creating. This was the reality for most of human existence. The true significance of this extinction lies in how it shapes our self-understanding. We've constructed our identity as humans in the absence of comparison. Without living alternatives, we've defined human solely by our own example. What would change if Neanderthals still walked among us? How would we reconsider our claims to uniqueness if Homo floresiensis still inhabited Indonesian islands? Our definitions of intelligence, consciousness, and even personhood might be radically different. The stakes extend beyond philosophy. Our evolutionary solitude has practical implications for our survival as a species. Without diversity in the human form, we've placed all our evolutionary eggs in a single basket. Other human species had different adaptations. Some thrived in cold that challenged us. Others navigated environments we found hostile. Each extinction represented the loss of unique evolutionary solutions to Earth's diverse challenges. Consider that Neanderthals lived successfully for over 300,000 years before disappearing. Our species has existed for roughly 300,000 years too, but our current civilization spans mere thousands. Their longevity puts our assumed permanence in perspective. The extinction pattern raises uncomfortable questions about our own vulnerability. If multiple human species could vanish despite their intelligence, technologies, and adaptations, what immunity do we possess against similar fates? Perhaps most significantly, these extinctions challenge the narrative of inevitable human progress. They reveal that evolution follows no predetermined path toward greater complexity or intelligence. Success in one era guarantees nothing in the next. The traditional view portrayed these extinct humans as primitive steps on the ladder toward us, Homo sapiens as evolution's crowning achievement. But this interpretation distorts the reality of parallel development and contingent survival. Each lost human species represented a unique experiment in being human. They weren't failed versions of us. They were themselves, adapted to their circumstances, successful until they weren't. Their extinction wasn't predestined, but circumstantial. Consider Homo erectus, who survived for nearly 2 million years, roughly 10 times longer than our species has existed so far. By any reasonable measure, their evolutionary longevity marks them as more successful than us, not less. Or the Neanderthals, with brains larger than our own, who created sophisticated tools, controlled fire, buried their dead with apparent ritual, and possibly created symbolic art. Their disappearance represents the loss of a distinct form of human consciousness. The Denisovans, known primarily from DNA and a few fossils, adapted to high-altitude environments in ways that modern Tibetans still benefit from through inherited genes. Their extinction erased a unique human adaptation to extreme conditions. Then there's Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of Indonesia, standing just over 3 feet tall with brains a third the size of ours, yet crafting tools and surviving for thousands of years. Their existence challenges our assumptions about brain size and intelligence. More recently discovered species like Homo luzonensis in the Philippines and Homo naledi in South Africa further complicate our family portrait. Each new finding reveals how diverse the human form once was and how much was lost. What catalyzed this extinction event? The timing offers our first major clue. Most of these human species disappeared within a relatively narrow window of time, roughly coinciding with the global expansion of Homo sapiens out of Africa. This correlation doesn't prove causation, but it raises profound questions. Did our ancestors directly contribute to the extinction of other human species? Or did we simply adapt more effectively to changing conditions that challenged all humans? The scientific debate continues, but the stakes of this question are enormous. If our success came at the cost of other human species, it forces us to reconsider triumphalist narratives about human history and our supposed moral advancement. Our understanding of these lost humans constantly evolves. Each new fossil, each DNA analysis, each archaeological discovery reshapes our understanding of who they were and how they lived. The picture grows more complex, not less. Recent findings suggest extensive interbreeding between different human species, many of us carrying Neanderthal DNA. Some populations have significant Denisovan heritage. These extinct humans live on in our genes, if not in physical form. This genetic legacy raises fascinating questions about what we inherited from them beyond physical traits. Did Neanderthal genes influence our immune systems? Did Denisovan DNA help certain populations adapt to high altitudes? What else might they have contributed? The implications extend to our understanding of consciousness itself. These were beings with complex brains who perceived reality, formed social bonds, created tools, and possibly developed symbolic thought. Each extinction erased a unique way of experiencing the world. Consider what was lost when the last Neanderthal died roughly 40,000 years ago. Not just a biological form, but a perspective, a way of being human that had evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, with its own wisdom and understanding. Or imagine the final days of isolated Homo floresiensis populations on Flores Island, perhaps surviving until as recently as 50,000 years ago. What knowledge, what adaptations, what ways of relating to their environment disappeared with them? These extinctions raise ethical questions too. If some disappeared through direct competition with our ancestors, do we bear any moral responsibility? Does their genetic presence in us create an obligation to understand and honor their legacy? The disappearance of other human species also shapes how we think about our future. Many scientists now warn that we're causing Earth's 6th mass extinction through our impact on natural systems. What lessons might these earlier human extinctions hold? One sobering possibility is that intelligence offers limited protection against extinction. Despite their cognitive abilities, tool use, and social organizations, our hominin relatives vanished. Brainpower alone did not guarantee their survival. Another insight concerns the role of population size and distribution. Some evidence suggests that certain human species maintained relatively small, isolated populations. This may have made them more vulnerable to local disasters or environmental changes. Diversity within a species also matters for survival. Genetic evidence indicates that Neanderthals had less genetic diversity than early Homo sapiens. This reduced variation might have limited their adaptability to changing conditions. Our current situation as the lone human species creates both advantages and vulnerabilities. We don't compete with other humans for ecological niches, but we also lack the evolutionary hedging that multiple human species provided. Imagine a pandemic that specifically targeted genetic sequences unique to Homo sapiens. With no other human species as backup, such a threat could theoretically end the human story entirely. Biological diversity served as insurance that we've now lost. The extinction of other humans also carries philosophical weight. It suggests that our existence is contingent rather than inevitable. There was no cosmic guarantee that we would be the survivors. Our presence and their absence resulted from specific circumstances. This recognition should inspire humility. We aren't the culmination of a preordained evolutionary journey, but one surviving branch of a once diverse family. Our success to date guarantees nothing about our future prospects. Perhaps most importantly, these extinctions remind us that for most of human history, we encompassed multiple kinds of people. The current definition of humanity, limited to a single species, represents a narrowing rather than an expansion. As we face unprecedented global challenges, from climate change to emerging diseases, the loss of diverse human adaptations and perspectives may prove costly. What solutions might Neanderthals or other extinct humans have developed to problems we now face alone? Our documentary explores these implications while examining competing theories about why we survived when others didn't. The answers reshape not just our understanding of the past, but our perspective on our present situation and possible futures. Chapter 3: A world of many humans. To understand the extinction of other human species, we must first recognize the world as it once was, a planet where multiple types of humans evolved, migrated, and coexisted across overlapping territories for hundreds of thousands of years. Our story begins roughly 2.8 million years ago in Africa. The earliest members of our genus, Homo habilis, emerged amid changing climate conditions that transformed forests into more open savanna environments. These changes created new ecological niches. Unlike modern humans, with our relatively homogeneous appearance, early human species showed remarkable diversity. They varied significantly in height, build, brain size, facial features, and adaptations to different environments. This diversity didn't develop in a simple linear fashion. Rather than a single line of descent leading inevitably to us, human evolution resembles a complex branching pattern with numerous contemporaneous species following parallel evolutionary paths. The oldest definitive Homo fossils come from East Africa, places like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania and the Afar region of Ethiopia. These ancient ancestors had smaller brains than us, but walked upright and began the practice of stone tool creation. By around 2 million years ago, some human species had already begun leaving Africa. Homo erectus, with a more modern body plan and larger brain, expanded across Asia, reaching as far as present-day China and Indonesia. This early migration out of Africa represented a momentous shift. Human species were adapting to dramatically different environments, from tropical forests to open grasslands to regions that experienced winter freezes. Each habitat shaped their evolution differently. Remarkably, Homo erectus survived for nearly 2 million years, making them the most enduring human species known. Their extinction roughly 100,000 years ago represents the loss of a lineage that had successfully adapted to changing conditions for 20 times longer than our recorded history. While Homo erectus spread across Asia, other human species evolved in Africa. Around 700,000 years ago, populations that would eventually give rise to both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens began diverging from a common ancestor. The Neanderthals followed a northern route out of Africa, eventually populating much of Europe and parts of Asia. They developed distinct adaptations to cold climates, shorter limbs, stockier builds, and larger nasal cavities to warm, frigid air. Meanwhile, in Africa, the lineage that would become Homo sapiens continued evolving. By roughly 300,000 years ago, humans with essentially modern skeletal features appeared, although their behavior and cognitive abilities were still developing. While these better-known species evolved, other human experiments were underway. On remote islands in Southeast Asia, isolated populations followed unexpected evolutionary paths, resulting in species like the diminutive Homo floresiensis. Standing just over 3 feet tall with brains comparable in size to chimpanzees, these hobbits challenge our assumptions about human evolution. Despite their small brains, they created stone tools and survived on Flores Island until relatively recent times. Similarly unexpected is Homo luzonensis, discovered in the Philippines in 2019. Dating to at least 50,000 years ago, they had a mixture of ancient and modern features. Curved finger bones suggesting climbing abilities alongside more modern teeth and foot structures. In the cold regions of Siberia, another distinct human population was developing, the Denisovans. Known primarily through DNA analysis and a few fossil fragments, they appear to have been widespread across Asia and adapted to high-altitude environments. More recent discoveries continue to expand our family portrait. Homo naledi, found deep in South African cave systems, combined a small brain with surprisingly modern-looking hands and feet. They may have deliberately disposed of their dead in hard-to-reach caverns. The implications are clear. For most of the past 2 million years, Earth hosted multiple types of humans simultaneously. They occupied different ecological niches, developed distinct cultural adaptations, and occasionally interacted where their territories overlapped. This wasn't a world of isolated species, but one with complex interactions. Where different humans met, they sometimes competed for resources. In other instances, they coexisted. And increasingly, evidence shows they interbred, producing viable offspring. We now know that most non-African humans today carry approximately 2% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. Some Asian populations have up to 6% Denisovan ancestry. These genetic contributions reveal a history of interaction rather than complete separation. The world of multiple humans reached its peak diversity between 300,000 and 100,000 years ago. During this period, at least 6, and possibly more, human species inhabited Earth simultaneously, each with their own adaptations and evolutionary trajectories. Imagine this lost world. In Europe, Neanderthals hunted large game with thrusting spears, wearing animal hides, and controlling fire in their shelters. Their robust builds and powerful muscles helped them thrive in environments far colder than their African origins. In Asia, Homo erectus populations continued their long tenure, having mastered basic tools and fire hundreds of thousands of years earlier. Their technologies remained relatively stable over vast time periods, suggesting successful adaptation to their environments. On remote islands like Flores, Homo floresiensis navigated tropical forests, possibly hunting dwarf elephants that had also evolved in isolation. Their small size may have been an adaptation to limited resources in their island environment. In the high plateaus of Asia, Denisovans developed adaptations to low-oxygen environments, genetic traits later inherited by Tibetan populations through interbreeding. Their exact appearance remains mysterious, known primarily through genetic signatures and a few fossils. And in Africa, early Homo sapiens were developing increasingly complex technologies and social structures. Though anatomically similar to modern humans, their behaviors and cognitive patterns were still evolving toward what we would recognize as modern. This multiplicity of human types wasn't evenly distributed. Some regions likely hosted several different species in close proximity, while others may have been dominated by just one type. Their interactions varied across time and geography. Evidence for these interactions comes from multiple sources. In some cases, different human tools are found in alternating layers at the same sites, suggesting they occupied the same territories at different times, perhaps seasonally or as climate conditions shifted. More direct evidence comes from fossils showing traits intermediate between known species, suggesting hybrid individuals. A jawbone from Romania, for instance, shows a mixture of Neanderthal and Homo sapiens features, while DNA confirms mixed ancestry. This world of many humans persisted for hundreds of thousands of years. It was the normal state of affairs, the backdrop against which all human activity took place. Our current solitude as the only human species is the historical anomaly. But beginning roughly 100,000 years ago, this diverse human landscape began to change. One by one, these different human species started disappearing. The extinction wasn't simultaneous, but followed a pattern that coincided with changing climates and the global expansion of Homo sapiens. The timing varied by region and species. Homo erectus, after their remarkable 2 million-year run, disappear from the fossil record around 110,000 years ago. Neanderthals held on until roughly 40,000 years ago, with their final refuges in southern Europe. Denisovans' extinction timeline remains unclear due to limited fossils, but they seem to have disappeared around the same period as Neanderthals. Homo floresiensis may have survived on isolated Flores until perhaps 50,000 years ago. The recently discovered Homo luzonensis and Homo naledi have less certain extinction dates, but neither appears to have survived into the period of written history. By approximately 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens stood alone, the sole surviving human species. This transition, from a world of many humans to a world of just one, represents one of the most significant yet underappreciated transformations in Earth's biological history. It fundamentally altered the developmental trajectory of life on our planet. Consider the magnitude. After millions of years of parallel experimentation with the human form, resulting in diverse adaptations to Earth's environments, all variants except one disappeared in a geologically brief window. What forces could account for such a pattern? The question becomes more puzzling when we recognize that many of these extinct humans had survived previous climate shifts, including multiple ice ages. Some had larger brains than early Homo sapiens. All had sophisticated enough technologies to thrive for millennia. Their disappearance coincided with significant environmental changes. The fluctuating conditions of the last ice age created resource pressures, but these changes affected different regions at different times, while the extinction pattern shows remarkable consistency. More tellingly, their disappearance also coincided with the expansion of Homo sapiens out of Africa and into territories previously occupied by these other human species. This correlation forms the basis for one of the most debated questions in paleoanthropology. Chapter 4. First Glimpses into Extinction. The evidence for this human extinction event comes from various sources: fossilized bones, stone tools, genetic material, and even the mysterious gaps in the archaeological record. Each offers a window into what may have happened. Let's begin with the physical remains. The fossil record, though incomplete, allows us to trace the presence and subsequent disappearance of different human species. Their absences in later geological layers tell us when they vanished from particular regions. Neanderthals provide our clearest extinction timeline. Their distinctive skeletal features, pronounced brow ridges, robust bones, and unique cranial shapes, make their fossils relatively easy to identify when found. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthal remains appear consistently across Europe and parts of Asia. Then, starting around 45,000 years ago, their geographic range begins contracting. By 40,000 years ago, they're found only in isolated pockets. The last confirmed Neanderthal sites are in southern Iberia and Gibraltar, dating to approximately 40,000 to 37,000 years ago. After this point, despite extensive archaeological investigation, their distinctive physical features vanish from the fossil record entirely. This disappearance coincides with the arrival of Homo sapiens in Europe. The timing varies by region, but a pattern emerges. Neanderthals tend to disappear from each area within a few thousand years after our species arrives. Similar patterns appear with other human species. Homo erectus fossils become increasingly rare after Homo sapiens begin expanding out of Africa, eventually disappearing completely. The final erectus populations may have held out in Indonesia the longest. For species known from limited remains, like Denisovans, Homo luzonensis, or Homo floresiensis, the extinction timeline is less precise. But none persist beyond the period when Homo sapiens had expanded globally. Beyond fossilized bones, archaeological evidence offers additional insights. Stone tools, hearths, and other cultural artifacts allow archaeologists to track the presence of different human populations even when skeletal remains are absent. Neanderthals created distinctive tools classified as Mysterian technology, carefully prepared stone cores used to produce specialized flakes for various purposes. These tools appear consistently in European archaeological sites for over 200,000 years. Then, coinciding with their physical disappearance, Mysterian tools vanish from the archaeological record. They're replaced by different technologies associated with Homo sapiens, more varied tool types using different production techniques. Similar technological transitions occur across Africa and Asia. Local tool traditions that persisted for thousands of generations suddenly disappear, replaced by new technologies that spread with the migration of Homo sapiens populations. These transitions weren't always abrupt. In some regions, transitional industries appear, tool assemblages showing characteristics of both local traditions and incoming Homo sapiens technologies. These might represent cultural exchange or even hybrid populations. The Chattelperronian industry of Western Europe, for instance, combines elements of Neanderthal Mysterian traditions with newer techniques associated with Homo sapiens. This suggests a period of overlap and possible cultural transmission between the species. Genetic evidence provides our third and perhaps most revealing window into this extinction event. Ancient DNA extracted from fossils allows us to track population movements, interbreeding events, and the genetic diversity of these lost humans. The Neanderthal genome, sequenced in 2010, revealed that non-African humans today carry approximately 2% Neanderthal DNA. This confirms interbreeding occurred between our species, primarily between 50,000 to 30,000 years ago. Similarly, DNA analysis showed some modern populations, particularly in Oceania, carry up to 6% Denisovan ancestry. Later studies identified specific genes inherited from these extinct humans that help modern Tibetans adapt to high-altitude environments. But this genetic evidence tells a complex story. While interbreeding occurred, the low percentage of archaic human DNA in our genomes indicates limited mixing. Most Neanderthal and Denisovan lineages disappeared completely rather than merging with ours. The genetic data also reveals declining diversity within these species before extinction. Late Neanderthals show signs of inbreeding and reduced genetic variation compared to earlier populations, suggesting they had become fragmented into small, isolated groups. The fourth line of evidence comes from paleoecological records, pollen samples, ice cores, and other environmental indicators that reveal changing climatic conditions during this extinction period. These help us understand the context in which these disappearances occurred. The extinction window coincided with significant climate fluctuations during the last ice age. Rapid warming and cooling events created environmental stress. Forests expanded and contracted, and animal communities underwent substantial changes. However, climate alone seems insufficient to explain the pattern. Many of these human species had already survived multiple climate shifts, including previous ice ages. Neanderthals were specifically adapted to cold conditions, yet disappeared during a period that included cold phases. More tellingly, these extinctions followed a consistent pattern that tracked the expansion of Homo sapiens rather than specific climate events. Areas where our species arrived earlier saw earlier disappearances of other humans, regardless of local climate conditions. This brings us to the most controversial evidence: signs of potential direct conflict. While rare, some Neanderthal fossils show traumatic injuries consistent with interpersonal violence, including a Neanderthal rib pierced by what appears to be a projectile point. At a site called Skull in Israel, archaeologists discovered a layer containing Neanderthal remains immediately followed by a layer with early Homo sapiens artifacts. This suggests one population replaced another, though the mechanism remains unclear. The rarity of direct evidence for conflict doesn't necessarily mean it didn't occur. Violent encounters between populations might leave limited archaeological traces, particularly if they happened over vast territories and time spans. As we compile these various lines of evidence, competing hypotheses emerge about what drove this human extinction event. Each attempts to explain the consistent pattern of disappearance following contact with Homo sapiens populations. The competitive exclusion hypothesis suggests our species simply outcompete others for limited resources. Perhaps our technologies, social organizations, or reproductive rates gave us an edge in exploiting the same ecological niches. A second hypothesis proposes that Homo sapiens brought novel pathogens that affected other human species more severely. Like European diseases that devastated indigenous American populations millennia later, these pathogens might have spread ahead of direct contact. A third possibility involves direct conflict, warfare, territorial displacement, or even targeted elimination of competing human groups. While controversial and difficult to prove, such behaviors are well documented throughout recorded human history. A fourth hypothesis suggests more subtle demographic factors. If Homo sapiens had slightly higher reproductive rates or lower infant mortality, they might have gradually outnumbered other humans even without direct competition or conflict. The absorption hypothesis proposes that other humans didn't truly go extinct, but were genetically swamped through interbreeding with our more numerous species. While interbreeding certainly occurred, the limited percentage of archaic DNA in modern humans makes this explanation alone insufficient. Most likely, the truth involves a combination of these factors, varying by region and species. The extinction event probably looked different in Southeast Asia than in Europe, with different mechanisms driving the same ultimate outcome. What's increasingly clear is that our own species expansion played a central role in this extinction pattern. Whether through direct action or indirect consequences of our presence, the arrival of Homo sapiens consistently preceded the disappearance of other human species. This realization forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our deep history. If our emergence as the lone human species came at the cost of all our evolutionary cousins, what does this tell us about ourselves and our relationship to the natural world? The evidence continues to accumulate. In 2019, researchers announced the discovery of a 13-year-old Neanderthal girl whose genome showed her mother was Neanderthal and her father was Denisovan. This remarkable finding confirms different human species not only met, but produced offspring. In the Philippines, the 2019 identification of Homo luzonensis added another branch to our family tree, one that survived until at least 50,000 years ago on islands that Homo sapiens would eventually reach. Their story is just beginning to be understood. Each new discovery adds detail to this extinction narrative while raising new questions. Why did some human species disappear quickly after contact with Homo sapiens, while others persisted longer? What determined which populations interbred and which remained separate? As we continue exploring these questions, one profound mystery emerges. What made our species different? What qualities or capabilities allowed Homo sapiens to expand globally while other equally intelligent, tool-using humans with hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary success ultimately vanished? The answer may lie in subtle cognitive differences, technological innovations, social structures, or communication abilities that left limited traces in the archaeological record. Or perhaps nothing inherently superior about our species determined this outcome at all. As we prepare to examine competing theories about this extinction event in detail, we confront the most profound question: was the disappearance of all other human species inevitable? Or could the world today still be home to multiple types of humans, had circumstances been slightly different? Chapter 5. The vanishing paradox. While the extinction pattern of other human species seems clear, anomalies in the evidence challenge simplistic explanations. The more we discover, the more contradictions emerge in the story of how and why our evolutionary cousins disappeared. Consider the Neanderthals. Their supposed cognitive limitations were long used to explain their extinction. Yet recent discoveries reveal sophisticated behaviors inconsistent with the narrative of a species doomed by inherent deficiencies. Cave sites in Spain contain pigment residues and perforated shells dating to at least 65,000 years ago, created by Neanderthals long before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. These findings suggest artistic expression and symbolic thinking previously attributed only to our species. In Croatia's Krapina cave, eagle talons modified by Neanderthals were discovered, dated to 130,000 years ago. Cut marks indicate they were fashioned into jewelry, evidence of aesthetic sensibility and symbolic representation millennia before our arrival. What we know is that Neanderthals exhibited behaviors that archaeologists long considered hallmarks of modern human cognition, explains paleoanthropologist Paula Villa. What remains uncertain is why these capabilities didn't prevent their extinction. The La Pharisee Neanderthal burial in France reveals careful arrangement of a child's remains. At multiple sites across Europe, we find evidence of intentional burial, suggesting ritualistic treatment of the dead and possibly conceptual thinking about an afterlife. Sophisticated hunting strategies also contradict the primitive Neanderthal narrative. At Schöningen, Germany, researchers found wooden spears preserved in ancient lake sediments. These carefully balanced throwing weapons demonstrate advanced planning and engineering 300,000 years ago. If Neanderthals were sophisticated enough to create art, bury their dead, and engineer effective weapons, asks archaeologist John Hawkes, why would contact with Homo sapiens lead so quickly to their extinction rather than cultural exchange and coexistence? This question becomes more puzzling when we examine their impressive biological adaptations. Neanderthals had larger brains than modern humans, averaging 1,600 cubic centimeters compared to our 1,400 cubic centimeters. Their robust builds provided greater strength and cold resistance. The paradox deepens when we consider their longevity as a species. Neanderthals existed for over 300,000 years, surviving multiple ice ages and dramatic climate shifts. Yet within a few thousand years of contact with Homo sapiens, they disappeared completely. Similar contradictions appear with Homo floresiensis. Initially, their small brains, approximately 380 cubic centimeters, led researchers to assume limited cognitive abilities. Yet they manufactured sophisticated stone tools requiring complex production sequences and forward planning. Even more puzzling, Homo floresiensis navigated open water to reach Flores Island. Whether they arrived by accident or intention, their presence demonstrates seafaring capabilities previously thought beyond the abilities of any species except Homo sapiens. A speculative idea proposes that we've underestimated the cognitive capabilities of other human species based on brain size alone, suggests paleoneurologist Emiliano Brunner. Neural organization may have mattered more than volume. Denisovans present their own contradictions. Though known from minimal fossils, their genetic legacy includes adaptations for high-altitude survival later inherited by Tibetans and Sherpas. This suggests sophisticated adaptation to extreme environments. Recent evidence indicates Denisovans reached islands requiring significant sea crossings at least 30,000 years ago. How could a supposedly less advanced human species navigate open ocean yet disappear after contact with Homo sapiens? Perhaps the greatest contradiction involves extinction timing. If climate change or resource competition drove these extinctions, we'd expect them to correlate primarily with environmental shifts. Instead, they correlate more closely with our species' expansion. What we know is that other human species survived numerous climate cycles before disappearing, notes paleoclimatologist Kronis Tsadakis. What remains uncertain is why the same adaptability failed them specifically during the period when Homo sapiens expanded globally. Another anomaly appears in population density estimates. Neanderthals maintained relatively low population densities throughout their existence, perhaps 5,000 to 10,000 individuals across Europe at any given time. They weren't overtaxing their environments. Genetic evidence further complicates the picture. Neanderthal populations show signs of decreasing genetic diversity before Homo sapiens arrived in significant numbers. This suggests they were already experiencing demographic challenges before direct competition. A particularly puzzling anomaly comes from sites showing simultaneous occupation patterns. At certain locations in the Levant, we find evidence of Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens using the same territories at different times over thousands of years. What we know is that these populations alternated in occupying the same landscapes for lengthy periods, explains archaeologist Ofer Bar Yosef. What remains uncertain is why this pattern of coexistence eventually ended with only one species surviving. The interbreeding evidence creates another contradiction. If these were truly separate species, we might expect genetic incompatibility. Yet viable hybrid offspring were clearly produced. This suggests differences were not as great as once believed. How, then, did distinct populations maintain separate identities for so long before one disappeared? The answer may lie in cultural rather than biological barriers, preferences for mating within one's own group despite occasional cross-species interactions. An anomaly in dating methods further complicates our understanding. Recent recalibrations of radiocarbon dating suggest some Neanderthal sites are younger than previously thought, potentially extending their survival and overlapping longer with Homo sapiens. The extinction timeline itself contains uncertainties, admits geochronologist Tom Hyam. Our dating methods have margins of error, and small populations might remain archaeologically invisible. The final disappearance may have been more gradual than we can detect. Consider the strange case of the Red Deer cave people from southwest China, dating to just 11,500 to 14,500 years ago, long after other human species supposedly went extinct. Their fossils show a mixture of archaic and modern features that defy simple classification. Are they late surviving Denisovans? A hybrid population? A previously unknown human species that persisted into near-modern times? Their existence challenges the clean narrative of Homo sapiens standing alone after 40,000 years ago. Similar anomalies appear with Homo heidelbergensis, fossils from Broken Hill, Zambia. Once thought to date to 300,000 years ago, New dating methods place them at just 125,000 to 300,000 years, suggesting another human lineage survived much longer than previously believed. What we know is that our picture of human extinction has substantial gaps, acknowledges paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer. What remains uncertain is whether these gaps hide evidence of longer survival or more complex patterns of interaction. Perhaps the most perplexing anomaly involves technology. If cognitive superiority explains our survival, we should see clear technological advantages for Homo sapiens. Yet for thousands of years, different human species created comparable tools. In the Levant region, early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals produced remarkably similar Middle Paleolithic stone tools for over 100,000 years of alternating occupation. No obvious technological advantage appears in the archaeological record during this period. Only around 50,000 to 40,000 years ago do we see the emergence of clearly distinct Upper Paleolithic technologies associated with Homo sapiens, coinciding with the beginning of the extinction period for other humans. This timing raises provocative questions. A speculative idea suggests that something changed in our cognitive or social capabilities at this time, proposes archaeologist Francesco D'Erico, not because of genetic evolution, but perhaps through cultural innovations that provided sudden advantages. Consider the Chattel-Perronian industry of Western Europe, sophisticated tools once attributed exclusively to Homo sapiens. We now know Neanderthals created them, possibly through cultural exchange or independent innovation, yet they still went extinct. If Neanderthals could adopt or develop advanced technologies, why did this not prevent their disappearance? The contradiction suggests factors beyond tool complexity determined survival outcomes during this critical period. Another anomaly involves apparent fluctuations in behavioral complexity. At some sites, we see sophisticated behaviors, cave art, personal ornaments, complex tools, followed by returns to simpler technologies, then complexity again. These patterns defy linear progression narratives. What we know is that behavioral modernity wasn't a single threshold that Homo sapiens crossed and others didn't, explains archaeologist April Noel. What remains uncertain is why our species ultimately prevailed despite this complex pattern. The geographical pattern of extinction creates additional puzzles. Why did Neanderthals disappear first from regions where they had the longest established presence? Why did island populations like Homo floresiensis, protected by geographic isolation, still vanish? The timing of extinction also varies puzzlingly by region. Neanderthals disappeared from the Middle East before Europe. Homo erectus may have survived longer in isolated Indonesian regions than on mainland Asia. These patterns don't align neatly with Homo sapiens migration routes. Perhaps most anomalous is the complete nature of the extinction. Throughout evolutionary history, when similar species compete, we typically see displacement from prime territories, but survival in marginal refuges. Yet no other human species found such refuge. The total disappearance of all other human species is the greatest anomaly, notes evolutionary biologist Svana Pabo. Competition rarely results in complete extinction. Something unusual happened during this period of human history. These anomalies and contradictions don't invalidate the extinction pattern, but reveal its complexity. Simple narratives of superior Homo sapiens outcompeting primitive cousins fail to explain the evidence. The truth appears more nuanced and perhaps more troubling. Chapter 6. Whispers from the shadows beyond scientific evidence lie cultural memories, myths, legends, and folklore that some researchers suggest might preserve echoes of a time when multiple human types coexisted. These narratives, while not scientific evidence, offer intriguing parallels to the archaeological record. Virtually every culture contains stories of others, beings neither fully human nor fully mythological. From European tales of elves, dwarves, and giants to Asian accounts of wild men in mountains, these narratives share curious similarities with what we know of extinct human species. What we know is that folklore often contains kernels of historical truth, explains anthropologist David Lancy. What remains uncertain is whether any such stories could preserve memories of other human species from tens of thousands of years ago. Consider European folkloric traditions of little people living in forests or underground, diminutive, elusive beings with their own tools and societies. Might these tales preserve distant memories of encounters with smaller-bodied human species like Homo floresiensis? In 2003, when archaeologists announced the discovery of Homo floresiensis on Flores Island, local Indonesian folklore experts noted similarities to stories of the Abu Gogo, small, hairy forest people said to have existed until recent centuries. According to these traditions, Abu Gogo stood upright, communicated with each other, stole food, and kidnapped children. Local stories claimed they survived until Dutch colonists arrived in the 1500s, far later than the scientific date of 50,000 years ago. A speculative idea proposes that isolated populations of Homo floresiensis might have survived later than we've found in the fossil record, suggests folklorist Talk Thompson. Oral traditions might preserve memories of actual encounters, not just imaginative tales. Similar folklore appears worldwide. Siberian peoples tell of the Chichuna, wild, hair-covered people inhabiting remote areas. In Central Asia, legends describe the Almas, primitive humans living in mountains. Both regions were once inhabited by Denisovans and Neanderthals. The Negritos of Southeast Asia have traditions about small, forest-dwelling tribes distinct from themselves. The indigenous Maori of New Zealand tell of the Pachapiri, fair-skinned people who avoided sunlight and lived in mountain regions before their arrival. These widespread traditions invite us to consider whether folklore might sometimes represent cultural memories of encounters with other human species, notes ethnographer Wade Davis. Not as literal records, but as transformed recollections of actual difference. Beyond folklore, physical evidence occasionally emerges that doesn't fit neatly into established timelines. These, out-of-place, findings are often controversial but raise provocative questions about whether other human types might have survived later than commonly accepted. In 1908, anthropologist Jose Rodriguez discovered unusual skulls in Lovelock Cave, Nevada. With red hair and reportedly measuring up to 7.5 feet tall, these remains sparked claims of giant humans. Most scientists attribute the findings to misinterpretation of normal variation. More credibly, in the 1950s, anthropologist Carlton Kuhn documented people in remote parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan with physical features reminiscent of Neanderthals. Prominent brow ridges, receding chins, and stocky builds. Were these traits inherited from ancient interbreeding? What we know is that certain isolated populations retain higher percentages of archaic human DNA, explains geneticist Louise Quintana Mercy. What remains uncertain is whether physical traits in modern populations could reflect this ancestry in visible ways. In 2019, a study of Flores Island inhabitants found evidence of genes possibly derived from extinct hominins distinct from known Neanderthals or Denisovans. This suggests interbreeding with local archaic populations, perhaps related to Homo floresiensis. The most tantalizing out-of-place evidence comes from the Red Deer cave people of southwest China, dating to just 14,500 to 11,500 years ago. These remains show a mixture of archaic and modern features that would place them within historical times, not deep prehistory. If confirmed, the Red Deer cave people would represent a distinct human population surviving until a time when agriculture was already beginning elsewhere, notes paleoanthropologist Darren Curnow. This dramatically narrows the gap between them and us. Genetic evidence occasionally yields similar anomalies. In 2019, researchers analyzing DNA from modern Papuans found evidence of an unknown hominin species that interbred with humans as recently as 15,000 to 30,000 years ago, far later than Neanderthal or known Denisovan contact. This mysterious DNA doesn't match any known species, suggesting another human type existed in the region without leaving fossils we've yet discovered. The finding hints at greater diversity in the recent human past than the fossil record alone reveals. What we know is that genetic analysis sometimes detects ghost populations that haven't been found in fossil form, explains geneticist Pontus Skoglund. What remains uncertain is how many such populations existed and how recently they disappeared. The question of when the last non-sapiens humans died becomes increasingly complex with each discovery. Traditional timelines place the extinction of all other human species by 40,000 years ago. New findings repeatedly challenge this boundary. In 2004, The discovery of Homo floresiensis suggested survival until approximately 50,000 years ago. By 2016, revised dating pushed this to about 60,000 years ago. Then in 2018, stone tools on Sulawesi suggested archaic humans in Indonesia until 65,000 years ago. Most dramatically, a 2019 study dated Homo naledi remains in South Africa to between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago, making them contemporaries of early Homo sapiens. But some researchers have suggested certain characteristics of the cave systems might indicate much more recent activity. The dating of final extinction events is inherently challenging, admits geochronologist Rainer Grun. Small, isolated populations leave minimal traces, and absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, particularly in remote or unexplored regions. Cultural evidence sometimes suggests later survival. Cave art in Indonesia, once attributed exclusively to Homo sapiens, has been redated to at least 51,800 years ago, before our species arrived in the region. Who created this art if not archaic human species? In the Philippines, stone tools dating to 700,000 years ago indicate ancient human presence, yet the islands required sea crossings to reach. This suggests unknown seafaring capabilities among archaic humans, challenging assumptions about their cognitive limitations. Perhaps most provocatively, certain archaeological sites show evidence of fire use, tool manufacture, or animal butchery without associated hominin fossils. Who created these traces if all non-sapiens humans were extinct by the conventional timeline? A speculative idea proposes that our extinction timeline remains incomplete, suggests archaeologist Paul Pettit. Regions with poor preservation conditions or limited archaeological investigation might harbor evidence of later survival we haven't yet discovered. Even recorded history contains tantalizing possibilities. Classical texts from ancient Greece, Rome, and China contain occasional references to encounters with wild people or human-like beings in remote regions. Are these merely mythological, or might some describe actual encounters? The Roman historian Pliny the Elder described remote tribes with strange features, excessive body hair, unusual proportions, distinctive vocalizations instead of language. While likely representing cultural misunderstandings of human variation, might some accounts preserve genuine observations of late surviving archaic humans? Chinese historical texts mention wild men in mountainous regions of Central Asia, territories where Denisovans once lived. Russian documents from the 18th and 19th centuries include reports of abnormal humans in remote Siberian forests. Colonial explorers worldwide recorded similar accounts. We must approach historical accounts with appropriate skepticism, cautions historian Robert Dewar. But we should also consider whether the conventional extinction timeline might be too rigid given continuing discoveries that push back boundaries. The persistence of wild man accounts across cultures has led some researchers to propose the controversial hypothesis that isolated populations of archaic humans might have survived into historical times in remote regions, gradually disappearing through absorption or extinction. The scientific consensus firmly places the extinction of all non-sapiens humans in prehistory, thousands of years before written records. Yet as new findings repeatedly extend survival timelines, the gap between prehistory and history narrows. Regardless of when the last non-sapiens human died, what's certain is that for most of human evolutionary history, multiple types of humans shared Earth. Our solitary status today represents an anomalous condition, a homogeneity unprecedented in the human story. What we know is that Homo sapiens eventually stood alone after a long period of coexistence with other human species, concludes paleoanthropologist Jean-Jacques Hublin. What remains uncertain is exactly when and how this transition to solitude occurred. As science advances, new techniques may yet uncover evidence of later survival or more complex interactions than currently recognized. The story of human extinction continues to evolve as we develop better methods for peering into our shadowed past. Chapter 7. The Extinction Equation. As we assemble the evidence of this human extinction event, the stakes of understanding it grow increasingly clear. This isn't merely an academic question about the distant past. It carries profound implications for how we understand ourselves and our future. If multiple human species coexisted for millions of years before all but one disappeared in a geologically brief window, we must ask, what changed? What factors transformed a stable pattern of diversity into the human singularity we know today? The extinction timeline provides our first critical clue. The disappearance of other human species coincides with two major developments: dramatic climate fluctuations during the last ice age and the global expansion of behaviorally modern Homo sapiens. What we know is that between approximately 70,000 and 30,000 years ago, something fundamentally changed in the dynamics between human species, explains paleoecologist Jamie Woodward. What remains uncertain is which factors proved most decisive. The climate of this period experienced rapid oscillations, sudden warming events followed by cold snaps that transformed ecosystems within human lifetimes. These changes created resource pressures that would have affected all human populations. Yet climate alone provides an insufficient explanation. Neanderthals had already survived multiple ice ages. Homo erectus endured for nearly 2 million years across diverse environments. The timing correlation with Homo sapiens expansion seems unlikely to be coincidental. The second major development during this period involved Homo sapiens themselves. Archaeological evidence shows rapid technological innovation, increased population densities, and the emergence of more complex social organizations among our direct ancestors. Around 50,000 to 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens material culture displays a dramatic acceleration. More sophisticated tools, standardized production methods, long-distance trade networks, symbolic art forms, and evidence of more elaborate social structures. A speculative idea proposes that cognitive or cultural changes in Homo sapiens, not just our physical presence, altered the competitive landscape for all human species, suggests cognitive archaeologist Stephen Mithen. Perhaps we crossed a threshold our cousins couldn't follow. These developments raise the critical question at the heart of this extinction event. Did our ancestors directly cause the disappearance of other humans? Or did independent factors make their extinction inevitable regardless of our species' actions? The evidence supports multiple possibilities, each with different implications for how we understand ourselves. The competitive exclusion hypothesis suggests Homo sapiens simply outcompete other humans for the same ecological niches, an inadvertent extinction. This interpretation gains support from evidence that our ancestors could produce food more efficiently, reproduce slightly faster, and adapt more quickly to changing conditions. Small advantages compounded over generations could have led to population replacement without direct conflict. What we know is that even slight competitive advantages can lead to species replacement over time, explains evolutionary biologist Robert Foley. What remains uncertain is whether such passive processes fully explain the consistent pattern and relatively rapid timing. A darker possibility involves direct conflict. Throughout recorded history, Homo sapiens groups have frequently displaced or eliminated competing populations. Might this pattern extend deeper into our prehistory, with our ancestors actively removing competing human species? While direct evidence for interspecies conflict remains limited, certain Neanderthal fossils show trauma patterns consistent with interpersonal violence. The timing and pattern of their disappearance, retreating to increasingly marginal territories, fits a displacement scenario. The stakes of this question are profound, notes anthropologist Pat Shipman. If our emergence as the lone human species involved the systematic elimination of others, it forces us to reconsider narratives about human progress and moral development. A third possibility involves disease transmission. When previously separated populations come into contact, pathogens can devastate groups lacking immune resistance. Might Homo sapiens have carried diseases that affected other human species more severely? This scenario finds parallels in much more recent history, when European diseases decimated indigenous American populations following contact. Similar dynamics could have played out tens of thousands of years earlier between different human species. What we know is that disease can cause population collapse without requiring direct contact between groups, explains paleopathologist Charlotte Roberts. What remains uncertain is whether we could detect such events in the limited fossil record available. The interbreeding evidence adds another dimension to the extinction equation. We now know Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and at least one other unknown hominid species. These interactions produced viable offspring that contributed to our genetic heritage. Yet rather than preserving these other human lineages, interbreeding may have accelerated their disappearance through genetic swamping, the gradual absorption of smaller populations into the larger Homo sapiens gene pool until their distinct identity disappeared. Extinction through hybridization represents a complex middle ground between peaceful coexistence and conflict, suggests population geneticist Laurent Escoffier. Their genes partially survive in us, but their distinct form and identity were lost. Most likely, the true extinction equation involved multiple factors working in combination: climate stress creating resource pressure, competitive disadvantages in changing environments, occasional conflict, disease transmission, and gradual genetic absorption through interbreeding. The relative contribution of each factor likely varied by region and species. What united these diverse scenarios was the consistent outcome. Within roughly 30,000 years of contact with expanding Homo sapiens populations, all other human species disappeared. What we know is that our species played some role in this extinction event, acknowledges archaeologist João Zilho. What remains uncertain is whether that role was primarily active or passive, intentional or incidental. As we contemplate this extinction equation, the implications grow increasingly significant. If climate stress combined with competition drove these extinctions, similar dynamics may apply to our future as we create anthropogenic climate change and resource scarcity. If disease transmission played a key role, our current vulnerability to pandemics takes on new evolutionary context. Our species has repeatedly demonstrated susceptibility to novel pathogens despite our technological advantages. If direct conflict contributed significantly, we must reckon with the possibility that intergroup violence has deeper roots in our evolutionary history than previously acknowledged. Not just competition between Homo sapiens groups, but between human species. And if absorption through interbreeding constituted the primary mechanism, we confront questions about cultural identity and genetic heritage that resonate with contemporary discussions about human diversity and group boundaries. Beyond these specific implications lies a more profound recognition. Our solitude as the lone human species resulted from particular historical circumstances, not inevitable superiority. Under slightly different conditions, we might have continued sharing Earth with other humans. A speculative idea suggests that the extinction of all other human species represents one of the most significant transformations in Earth's biological history, proposes paleoanthropologist Maria Martinon Torres. It fundamentally altered humanity's evolutionary trajectory. Consider how different our world would be if Neanderthals still inhabited Europe, Denisovans roamed Asian highlands, and various other human species occupied their ecological niches. How would their presence have shaped our development? How would we define humanity? Would we have developed concepts of universal human rights if human encompassed multiple species with different capabilities and appearances? Would religions and philosophies have evolved differently if confronted with alternative forms of human consciousness? Would technological development have followed different paths through collaboration or competition between distinct human intelligences? Would art, music, and culture show greater diversity through the contributions of minds evolved along separate trajectories? These questions highlight what was lost in this extinction event, not just biological diversity, but potential cultural, intellectual, and spiritual diversity. The narrowing to a single human species represents a profound simplification of what being human could encompass. What we know is that for most of human evolutionary history, being human meant being one kind of human among many, reflects philosophical anthropologist Raymond Corby. What remains uncertain is how this diversity might have continued evolving had extinction not occurred. The extinction equation also carries implications for our interactions with other intelligent species on Earth. Our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans, face extinction threats primarily due to human activity. If our emergence as the lone human species involved the displacement of our closest relatives, are we repeating this pattern with great apes today? Does our evolutionary history reveal a consistent tendency to eliminate cognitive competitors? Perhaps most significantly, the human extinction event forces us to confront our own vulnerability. If multiple human species with hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary success could disappear relatively rapidly, what guarantees our own permanence? The extinction of other humans wasn't inevitable. It resulted from specific circumstances and interactions, warns paleoanthropologist Katerina Harvati. Understanding these dynamics may be crucial for assessing our own species' resilience. As climate change accelerates, resource constraints intensify, and global systems grow increasingly interconnected, the lessons from this earlier human extinction take on new urgency. What vulnerabilities might we share with our extinct relatives? Did Neanderthals recognize their gradual disappearance? Did Denisovans understand what was happening as their territories contracted? Or did extinction occur too slowly across too vast a geography for any individual to perceive the broader pattern? As we approach potentially transformative technologies, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, brain-machine interfaces, we may be creating the conditions for new forms of intelligence to emerge. Will we repeat ancient patterns or forge different relationships? A speculative idea proposes that understanding why we are the last humans standing might help ensure we don't become the last humans to fall, suggests futurist Jaime Cascio. Our solitude carries both privileges and vulnerabilities. The extinction equation ultimately reveals something profound about our place in nature. Our current status as Earth's sole human species isn't the inevitable result of superior design, but the contingent outcome of specific historical processes we've only begun to understand. Chapter 8. The convergence of evidence. As we approach the heart of this extinction mystery, three dominant theories emerge from the evidence, each with compelling support and significant implications. By examining where they converge and diverge, we may find the closest approximation to truth currently available. The first theory posits what we might call passive replacement, the idea that Homo sapiens didn't directly cause other human extinctions, but simply outcompete them through subtle advantages in adaptation, reproduction, or resource utilization. This theory finds support in several lines of evidence. Firstly, Homo sapiens maintained slightly higher population densities than Neanderthals, as indicated by larger and more numerous archaeological sites during periods of overlapping territories. Demographic models suggest even a 1% reproductive advantage, slightly lower infant mortality, or marginally shorter birth intervals could result in complete population replacement within a few thousand years, matching the observed timeline. What we know is that small demographic advantages compound over generations, explains paleodemographer Anna Di Giovanni. What remains uncertain is whether such passive processes alone could produce the consistent pattern of extinction we observe. The passive replacement theory also points to climate instability during the last ice age. Between 60,000 to 30,000 years ago, the planet experienced dramatic oscillations between warming and cooling. These rapid shifts created ecological stress for all human populations. While all human species face these challenges, Homo sapiens may have possessed more flexible adaptive responses. Our archaeological record shows more rapid technological innovation and greater diversity in subsistence strategies during this period. Neanderthals had successfully adapted to cold conditions, but the rapid climate oscillations created unstable environments requiring constant readaptation, notes paleoclimatologist William Davies. Our species may have possessed greater adaptive plasticity. The passive replacement theory offers a morally comfortable explanation: extinction without explicit aggression. It suggests our ancestors simply lived their lives more efficiently, with other humans gradually fading away through natural competitive processes. However, this theory struggles to explain the completeness of the extinction and its consistent timing correlation with Homo sapiens' arrival. If purely ecological factors were responsible, we might expect some human species to find refuge niches where they could persist. The second major theory proposes active displacement, suggesting our ancestors played a more direct role in the extinction of other humans through territorial competition, resource monopolization, and possibly direct conflict. This theory finds support in the consistent geographic pattern of extinction following Homo sapiens' expansion. In each region, other human species begin disappearing shortly after our ancestors arrive, regardless of local environmental conditions. Archaeological evidence occasionally reveals direct interaction between species. At several sites in Europe, Layers containing Neanderthal artifacts are immediately followed by Homo sapiens occupations, suggesting direct replacement rather than gradual transition. What we know is that human groups throughout recorded history have frequently displaced competitors from desirable territories, observes anthropologist Lawrence Keeley. What remains uncertain is whether such behaviors extend into our deep prehistoric past. Some Neanderthal remains show traumatic injuries consistent with interpersonal violence, though whether these resulted from conflict with Homo sapiens or other Neanderthals remains ambiguous. The pattern of retreating into increasingly marginal territories fits a displacement scenario. Perhaps most tellingly, the extinction pattern mirrors what anthropologists call competitive exclusion. When two species occupy identical ecological niches, one typically displaces the other. Homo sapiens and other humans likely competed for similar resources and territories. The active displacement theory doesn't necessarily imply organized warfare or genocide. It might involve smaller-scale processes, territorial defense, resource competition, occasional violent encounters that cumulatively produced extinction over thousands of years. A speculative idea proposes that our ancestors may have viewed other human species as competitors or threats rather than potential allies, suggests evolutionary psychologist Pascal Boyer. Such perception could have shaped interaction patterns without requiring modern concepts of species difference. This theory aligns with known patterns of human behavior but raises uncomfortable questions about our species' past. If our emergence as the lone human species involved the active elimination of competitors, it challenges narratives of moral progress. The third major theory proposes extinction through interaction, suggesting more complex dynamics beyond simple competition. This includes disease transmission, interbreeding with genetic absorption, and cultural diffusion altering traditional adaptive strategies. This theory finds support in genetic evidence showing that disease resistance genes are among those most commonly inherited from Neanderthals, suggesting pathogen exposure played a significant role in interactions between species. When previously isolated populations contact each other, novel diseases can devastate groups lacking immune resistance. Our ancestors may have carried pathogens that affected other human species more severely without requiring direct conflict. What we know is that Homo sapiens evolved in tropical Africa, while Neanderthals adapted to temperate Eurasia, explains paleopathologist Charlotte Roberts. Each would have hosted different pathogens to which the other lacked immunity. The interbreeding evidence provides another mechanism for extinction through interaction. Genetic studies confirm that Homo sapiens interbred with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and at least one other unknown human species. Rather than preserving these populations, interbreeding may have accelerated their disappearance through genetic swamping, the gradual absorption of smaller populations into the larger Homo sapiens gene pool until their distinct identity disappeared. If Neanderthal populations were already declining due to climate stress or competition, even occasional interbreeding with more numerous Homo sapiens could have rapidly diluted their genetic distinctiveness, notes population geneticist Alan Templeton. Cultural interaction may have disrupted traditional adaptations. If other human species adopted Homo sapiens technologies or practices without fully understanding their implementation, they might have abandoned successful traditional strategies that had ensured their survival. This theory proposes that extinction occurred not through simple replacement or conflict, but through a complex web of interactions, what anthropologist Joseph Henrich calls cultural hitchhiking, where genetic replacement follows cultural replacement. What we know is that when societies with different technological systems interact, the direction of cultural flow is rarely equal, explains Henrich. What remains uncertain is how such dynamics might have played out between different human species. The evidence suggests no single theory fully explains this extinction event. Reality likely involved elements of all three: passive competition advantages compounded by active displacement in some regions, complicated by disease, interbreeding, and cultural exchanges. The relative contribution of each factor would have varied by region and species. In some areas, climate stress and passive competition might have been primary. In others, direct conflict may have played a larger role. Disease impact would have varied by population and exposure patterns. What unites these diverse scenarios is the consistent outcome. Within roughly 30,000 years of contact with expanding Homo sapiens populations, all other human species disappeared. Our role in this process appears significant, whether intentional or incidental. The convergence of evidence points to a complex extinction process rather than a simple one, concludes paleoanthropologist John Hawkes. The question isn't whether Homo sapiens played a role, but what kind of role we played in different times and places. This more nuanced understanding allows us to move beyond simplistic narratives of either innocent expansion or deliberate extermination. The truth appears to lie in the complex interactions between species that were simultaneously competitors and potential mates, threats, and curiosities. As we weigh these competing theories, we're forced to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature. Are we inherently displacement specialists? Did our ancestors eliminate competitors as a matter of course? Or were these extinctions primarily accidental byproducts of our success? The answers matter beyond academic interest. They inform how we understand ourselves, our evolutionary history, and potentially our future. The patterns that led to our solitude as the last humans may still shape our interactions with each other and with other species today. Chapter 9. Beyond the Bones, recent scientific advances are transforming our understanding of extinct humans and their disappearance. New technologies allow us to extract information from fossils that would have seemed impossible even a decade ago, revealing complex interactions between ancient human species. Perhaps the most revolutionary developments come from paleogenetics, the study of ancient DNA. When Svante Pääbo and colleagues published the first Neanderthal genome in 2010, they launched a new era in understanding human evolution and extinction. The genetic evidence revealed something profound. These weren't just similar-looking species that happened to go extinct. They were close relatives with whom we shared ancestry, competed for resources, occasionally interbred, and whose genes still influence us today. What we know is that approximately 2% of the genome in non-African humans comes from Neanderthals, explains geneticist David Reich. What remains uncertain is exactly how this genetic exchange affected either population during their period of interaction. More recent genetic studies have identified specific Neanderthal genes that affect modern human immune function, skin and hair characteristics, pain sensitivity, mood disorders, and even susceptibility to certain diseases, including COVID-19. This genetic legacy creates a profound paradox. Our biological identity includes contributions from species we ultimately replaced. We are, in a very real sense, part Neanderthal and part Denisovan. The boundary between them and us blurs with each discovery. A speculative idea proposes that rather than thinking of extinction as complete replacement, we might consider it partial absorption, suggests geneticist Joshua Akey. Their biological legacy continues in us, even as their distinct form disappeared. New analytical techniques have revolutionized our understanding of ancient diets, mobility patterns, and even life histories of individual Neanderthals. Isotope analysis of teeth and bones reveals migration routes, seasonal movements, and dietary changes throughout lifespans. These studies paint increasingly complex portraits of extinct humans. Rather than static populations with fixed behaviors, we see individuals making adaptive choices, responding to environmental changes, and occasionally interacting with other human species. What we know is that Neanderthals were highly mobile, seasonally adjusting their territories and diets, notes geochemist Clervia Jowan. What remains uncertain is how these mobility patterns changed when Homo sapiens entered their territories. Microscopic analysis of dental calculus, hardened plaque on teeth, has revealed Neanderthals self-medicated with plants having antibiotic properties and consumed a more varied diet than previously thought, including cooked grains and plants alongside meat. Brain imaging technologies applied to fossil skulls have mapped Neanderthal brain structures, revealing differences in cognitive architecture while maintaining similar overall volume to Homo sapiens. Their minds work differently, but not necessarily less effectively. The emerging picture suggests Neanderthals weren't cognitively inferior, but differently specialized, explains paleoneurologist Emiliano Brunner. Their extinction may reflect not cognitive limitations, but simply different adaptive priorities. Perhaps the most surprising recent discoveries involve symbolic behavior. New dating techniques revealed that some European cave paintings predate Homo sapiens' arrival, meaning Neanderthals created abstract art, challenging assumptions about their cognitive capabilities. Similarly, perforated shells and pigments found at Neanderthal sites suggest personal ornamentation and symbolic expression. They appear to have buried their dead with apparent ritual, used eagle talons as jewelry, and possibly created music using specially modified bones. These findings create another paradox. If Neanderthals possessed symbolic thinking, artistic expression, and complex social behaviors, why didn't these capabilities prevent their extinction? What advantage did Homo sapiens possess that proved so decisive? What we know is that cognitive and cultural differences between human species were matters of degree, not kind, observes archaeologist April Noel. What remains uncertain is what specific differences might have influenced survival outcomes. New dating techniques have also refined our understanding of extinction timelines. Improved radiocarbon calibration suggests Neanderthals disappeared more rapidly after Homo sapiens' arrival than previously thought, within a few thousand years in many regions. This compressed timeline makes passive replacement through slight competitive advantages less plausible as the sole explanation. The speed of displacement in some regions suggests more active processes were involved. The more precisely we can date the disappearance of various human species, the more challenging it becomes to explain through gradual demographic processes alone, notes geochronologist Tom Hyam. Something more immediate appears to have occurred in some regions. Climate reconstruction technologies have also advanced dramatically, allowing scientists to model environmental conditions with unprecedented precision. These reconstructions reveal that extinction timing doesn't consistently align with the most severe climate events. Instead, the strongest correlation remains with Homo sapiens' arrival and expansion patterns. This doesn't eliminate climate as a factor, but suggests it was a contextual condition rather than the primary driver of extinction. What we know is that other human species had already survived numerous climate shifts, including previous ice ages, explains paleoclimatologist Kronis Tsadakis. What remains uncertain is why similar adaptability failed them specifically during the period when Homo sapiens expanded globally. Perhaps the most intriguing recent development involves ghost populations, human groups detected through genetic signals without corresponding fossil evidence. DNA analysis reveals our ancestors interbred with multiple unknown human lineages that left genetic traces without leaving fossils. These ghost populations suggest greater human diversity than the fossil record alone indicates. They remind us that absence of fossils doesn't mean absence of populations. The full diversity of ancient humans likely exceeds what we've discovered. A speculative idea proposes that numerous human species may have existed beyond those we've identified through fossils, suggests paleogeneticist Pontus Skoglund. The true human family tree may be far bushier than current evidence indicates. These scientific advances collectively reveal a profound paradox about human extinction. The more we learn about other human species, the more difficult it becomes to explain why they disappeared. Their capabilities increasingly appear comparable to early Homo sapiens. Neanderthals survived in Europe for over 300,000 years before our arrival. They weathered multiple ice ages, crafted sophisticated tools, controlled fire, created art, and even developed medicines. Yet within a few thousand years of our ancestors' arrival, they vanished. Similarly, Homo floresiensis navigated sea barriers to reach Indonesian islands, developed unique adaptive strategies for island environments, and maintained stable populations for thousands of generations. Yet they too disappeared after Homo sapiens reached their region. The paradox intensifies with each discovery, notes paleoanthropologist João Zilho. The more capable these extinct humans appear, the more mysterious their relatively rapid disappearance becomes. This leads to what we might call the sapiens paradox. Why did our species alone survive when others with similar capabilities did not? If multiple human types were capable of symbolic thought, complex tool use, and environmental adaptation, what made us different? What we know is that the distinction between Homo sapiens and other human species was not a simple matter of superior versus inferior, explains archaeologist Francesco D'Erico. What remains uncertain is what specific differences proved decisive for survival. One possibility involves social organization rather than individual capability. Evidence suggests Homo sapiens maintained larger social networks and trade relationships extending hundreds of kilometers. This social interconnectedness may have provided crucial advantages during crisis periods. Another possibility concerns demographic resilience. Our species maintained larger overall populations and greater genetic diversity than Neanderthals. This may have provided greater resistance to disease, more adaptive genetic variation, and better recovery from population crashes. Population structure may have been more important than individual capability, suggests paleogeneticist Louise Quintana-Murci. Neanderthals lived in smaller, more isolated groups that were collectively more vulnerable to extinction despite individual robustness. Language differences might also have played a crucial role. While other humans likely possessed some form of language, subtle differences in linguistic capability could have significant effects on knowledge transmission, social coordination, and cultural adaptation. A speculative idea proposes that Homo sapiens may have possessed more flexible communicative systems, allowing faster adaptation to novel challenges, suggests cognitive scientist Tecumseh Fitch. Small differences in information processing can yield large survival differences. The scientific advances of recent years have transformed our understanding while deepening the central mystery. The extinction of other humans no longer appears inevitable or obviously explained by inherent sapiens superiority. Instead, it increasingly seems a complex historical contingency, the result of specific circumstances and interactions rather than predetermined evolutionary destiny. Had conditions been slightly different, multiple human species might still share Earth today. Chapter 10. The Last Humans Standing. We've journeyed through millions of years of human evolution, examined competing theories for extinction, and explored cutting-edge scientific discoveries. Now we arrive at the central revelation promised at the outset. What does the extinction of all other human species tell us about ourselves? The evidence converges on a profound and unsettling truth. Our solitude as the last human species standing likely resulted not from any single advantage, but from a unique combination of characteristics, some admirable, some troubling, and many simply accidental. This constellation of factors made Homo sapiens simultaneously the greatest allies and most dangerous competitors other human species ever encountered. We were potential mates and mortal threats, carriers of useful innovations and devastating diseases, possible trading partners, and territorial rivals. What we know is that our ancestors weren't simply better in some objective sense, explains evolutionary anthropologist Brian Stewart. What remains uncertain is which specific combination of traits proved decisive for our survival when others disappeared. The evidence increasingly suggests our most significant advantage wasn't individual intelligence or physical prowess, but collective capability, our capacity to cooperate flexibly in larger groups than other human species, creating more robust social networks. Archaeological evidence indicates Homo sapiens maintained trade networks spanning hundreds of kilometers, exchanging materials and likely information across vast distances. Neanderthals, by contrast, primarily utilized resources within about 20 kilometers of their home bases. These extended social networks would have provided crucial advantages during environmental crises, notes archaeologist Clive Gamble. When local resources failed, Homo sapiens could draw on distant connections for support that other humans couldn't match. This social interconnectedness likely fostered greater cultural transmission and innovation. Ideas, techniques, and adaptations could spread more rapidly across Homo sapiens networks, allowing faster responses to changing conditions than more isolated human groups. Another key advantage appears to have been demographic. Our species maintained larger total population sizes and greater genetic diversity than other humans. Genetic evidence indicates Neanderthals had approximately one-third the genetic diversity of contemporary Homo sapiens. Lower genetic diversity makes populations more vulnerable to disease outbreaks and environmental changes, explains population geneticist Matthias Jacobson. Even if individual Neanderthals were robust, their population structure increased their collective extinction risk. Our reproductive patterns may have provided another critical advantage. Evidence suggests Homo sapiens had slightly shorter intervals between births and lower infant mortality than Neanderthals, allowing faster population growth and recovery after crashes. These seemingly small demographic differences would compound over generations, potentially explaining how our ancestors could gradually displace other humans from shared territories without requiring direct conflict or inherent individual superiority. Yet the evidence also points to darker aspects of our success. The geographic pattern of extinction following Homo sapiens expansion suggests our ancestors were exceptionally effective at monopolizing resources and territories when they entered new regions. Throughout recorded history, our species has demonstrated remarkable capacity for both cooperation with insiders and competition against perceived outsiders. This dual tendency, forming cohesive in-groups while excluding out-groups, may have deep evolutionary roots. A speculative idea proposes that Homo sapiens might have categorized other human species as other more readily than they viewed each other, suggests anthropologist Agustin Fuentes. This cognitive boundary making could facilitate both exploitation and displacement. The timing correlation between our expansion and other humans' extinction becomes more troubling when we consider that identical patterns continue throughout recorded history. Indigenous populations frequently collapse following contact with expanding societies. This pattern suggests our success may involve a potent combination of adaptive traits. We cooperate effectively with those we consider us, while competing ruthlessly with those perceived as them, all while transmitting both innovations and diseases through our extensive social networks. What we know is that contact with expanding Homo sapiens populations typically preceded extinction for other human species, acknowledges paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer. What remains uncertain is whether this represents our inherent nature or specific historical circumstances. The central revelation emerging from this evidence is both humbling and unsettling. Our solitary status as Earth's only human species isn't the inevitable result of superior design or moral destiny. It's the contingent outcome of particular traits intersecting with specific historical conditions. Had circumstances been slightly different, had climate patterns varied, had disease outbreaks affected populations differently, had certain cultural innovations occurred in other human groups first, we might not have been the survivors. This understanding fundamentally challenges triumphalist narratives about human evolution. We aren't the predestined pinnacle of evolutionary progress, but the last ones standing after a complex historical process involving competition, climate change, cultural development, and likely some measure of luck. The disappearance of all other human species represents less an endorsement of our superiority than a sobering reminder of extinction's reality, notes paleontologist David Jablonski. Being the sole survivors doesn't make us invincible, it makes us vulnerable in new ways. This vulnerability takes multiple forms. As the only human species, we've placed all our evolutionary eggs in a single basket. We lack the hedging that multiple human types provided against extinction. If a threat specifically targets our unique biology, no alternative human forms exist as backup. Our solitude has also shaped our self-perception in problematic ways. Without living comparisons, we've defined human solely by our own example, potentially limiting our understanding of what intelligence, consciousness, and personhood might encompass. What we know is that for most of human evolutionary history, multiple types of minds experienced reality in potentially different ways, explains cognitive archaeologist Thomas Wen. What remains uncertain is how this diversity might have enriched our collective understanding had it continued. The extinction of other humans also carries implications for our current relationship with Earth's remaining great apes, our closest living relatives. Chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans now face extinction threats primarily due to human activity. A speculative idea proposes that we may be repeating ancient patterns in our treatment of great apes today, suggests primatologist Craig Stanford. The same tendencies that may have contributed to other humans' extinction could be driving our impact on our evolutionary cousins. Perhaps most significantly, this extinction event forces us to reconsider assumptions about inevitable human progress. If multiple human experiments could end after hundreds of thousands of years of success, our own relatively brief tenure offers no guaranteed future. The revelation at the heart of this extinction story is that we are simultaneously more powerful and more vulnerable than traditional narratives suggest, powerful enough to have potentially contributed to the extinction of all our closest relatives, yet vulnerable to similar fates ourselves. Our emergence as the lone human species appears to reflect specific historical circumstances rather than predetermined evolutionary destiny. Understanding these circumstances may be crucial for navigating our own uncertain future. What we know is that we are an unprecedented biological experiment, a single human species with global distribution and technological mastery, observes futurist Jaime Cascio. What remains uncertain is whether this experiment will prove sustainable over evolutionary timescales. The extinction of other humans teaches us that intelligence offers limited protection against extinction, that adaptation to current conditions guarantees nothing when conditions change, and that one successful species can disappear with remarkable speed in evolutionary terms. As we face accelerating climate change, emerging diseases, resource constraints, and our own technological creations, these lessons take on new urgency. The fate of other human species wasn't determined by moral worth or cosmic purpose, but by specific adaptive challenges they couldn't overcome. The ultimate revelation may be that our unique human traits, our capacity for both cooperation and conflict, innovation and exploitation, carry both promise and peril, concludes evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar. The same characteristics that may have contributed to our solitude could determine whether that solitude proves brief or enduring. We began this journey by noting that for over 99% of the time humans have existed on Earth, multiple human species shared the planet. Our current solitude, a world with only one kind of human, is the historical anomaly, not the norm. As we conclude, we're left with a profound recognition. The extinction of all other human species represents one of the most significant transitions in Earth's biological history, yet one we've largely failed to reckon with in our understanding of ourselves. These lost humans weren't failed versions of us or primitive precursors. They were parallel experiments in being human, unique evolutionary paths exploring different possibilities of what humanity could become. Their extinction represents an irreplaceable loss of diversity in the human form. Imagine how differently we might understand ourselves if Neanderthals still inhabited Europe, if Denisovans roamed Asian highlands, if various other human species continued their evolutionary journeys alongside us. How would their perspectives enrich or challenge our own? Would we define concepts like intelligence, consciousness, and morality differently if confronted with alternative forms of human cognition? Would our religions, philosophies, and cultural expressions show greater diversity through interaction with minds evolved along separate trajectories? These questions remind us what was lost, not just biological diversity, but potential cultural, cognitive, and spiritual diversity. The narrowing to a single human species represents a profound simplification of what being human could encompass. Yet traces of these lost humans persist, in our genes, in the archaeological record, perhaps even in cultural memories preserved in folklore. They are not entirely gone but echo within us and around us, reminding us of paths not taken and possibilities foreclosed. As the last humans standing, we carry a unique responsibility, not only to understand what happened to our extinct relatives, but to consider what their disappearance means for our own future. Their extinction reminds us that no species, however successful, is guaranteed permanence. Perhaps the most fitting memorial we could offer these vanished humans is to recognize the contingency of our own existence, to approach our future with both the bold adaptability that may have given us an edge and the humility to recognize that we, too, could join them in extinction. In the shadowed branches of our family tree lie both warnings and wisdom. By acknowledging these lost humans not as evolutionary dead ends, but as fellow travelers whose journeys ended while ours continues, we may gain insights crucial for ensuring our own story doesn't similarly conclude. If you've enjoyed this exploration of our hidden human past, consider subscribing to our channel for more journeys through the shadows of history, where we illuminate the stories that time forgot and the mysteries that continue to shape our understanding of what it means to be human.